You're about to enter a new dimension where boundaries of life sciences, data, and technology blur, and AI reshapes what's possible. Welcome to the Improzone, powered by Improzo.
Welcome back to the Improzone. We are here to explore the intersection of AI, data, and life sciences innovation. And as before, I am your host, Jane Urban. And today's episode is super special because we are going to talk about one of our really deep partnerships that we have with a wonderful partner for the AI space, a company called Enkrypt.ai. And, I'm so excited to introduce everyone to a couple people in this particular conversation. First is our very own Abhishek Trigunait, who's a founder and CTO at Improzo. And then also Nathan Trueblood, who is the head of product at Enkrypt.ai. And, what's really fun about today is that we get to really dive into this collaboration between these two companies and thinking about how we set just a whole new bar for data security and for responsible AI, which I know is a topic that is something people are really wanting to learn about and wanting to get a better understanding of. And in the pharma space, especially, I think we've got a long way to go. So it's super exciting to talk about this partnership and to welcome both of you. So welcome, Abhi and Nathan.
Thank you. Thank you.
So happy to have you. So the first thing is just this partnership, right? So I'm going to start with you, Abhi, just because it's kind of from the Improzo side of the house. What was the reason that you sought a partner in the AI security space, and obviously specifically, why did you end up choosing to partner with Enkrypt.ai?
That's a great question to begin with, Jane. I mean, when you think about what's happening in the pharma landscape with AI adoption reaching, going all the way through the roof and reaching numbers that we never thought that we would see in our lifetime. And then, of course, now with advent of Gen AI, there's further increased focus on security and privacy. And then to top it all, if you think about our own ISO platform, which you, of course, are aware of, which we are calling out as the AI execution engine for life sciences, it all comes together to how do we make sure that AI is scalable, but also AI is secure. So that's how all of this sort of started, which is coming from the industry, coming to our clients, and then coming to our own very platform. Now, the question about why Enkrypt. So, of course, Enkrypt.ai is a trusted name in the industry, supporting some of the leading enterprises, including the likes of Salesforce, NetApp, and many more, which you can't disclose. But these are the market leaders in the space. And then, lastly, both the companies share this passion for secure AI, and above all, how do we make it secure for our clients and for the patients? So this is why we decided to go ahead with this partnership with Enkrypt.
Awesome. And Nathan, what excited you about partnering with Improzo?
Well, I think it's really about the potential we see, particularly in life sciences and pharma. So what excites me about this is that, we bring a really comprehensive understanding of generative AI and of the risks that are there. But at the same time, we see the huge potential for AI to transform the kinds of discoveries, the kinds of research, the kind of things that life sciences is focused on. And so, what I'm excited about in the partnership is that Improzo really brings that deep understanding of the pharma customers, of the use cases that are there, because that's really where the opportunity to accelerate innovation with AI is coming from. And so, you guys bring that deep expertise and understanding. And we know that in pharma, there's a lot to lose, there's a lot at stake here. And so, we're really passionate about AI security and safety because we know there's a lot at stake. Everyone is excited about the potential here. We strongly believe that if you don't have the right security and safety and responsible AI in place, it's really going to limit how fast we can go. So that's what I'm excited about, is that you guys bring the deep understanding of the use cases of pharma. We bring the deep understanding of how to make it safe.
That's a beautiful combination. And I do think the pharma industry, and I hope I'm not speaking too out of turn here, but slow to adopt a lot of technology in general. And even AI, I think it's something where there's a lot of anxiety around what are we going to do with this and how is it going to be okay for us to use. And so, the idea that you can help that be more secure sounds really appealing, but maybe this is the naivete of the pharma industry in general. But maybe the most basic question of all is, what do you guys do? What is Enkrypt AI, and how does it actually do this magic of protecting generative AI workflows and making them secure?
Great question, Jane. So fundamentally, what we do is we are helping our customers, especially when they're folks like pharma who are highly regulated. We are helping them move faster to adopt AI. And so to get specific about what that means is whether it's a generative AI model or increasingly an agentic workflow, we will assess the risk in that workflow, in that agent, in that model. And what that means is we really just evaluate the heck out of the model and look for security vulnerabilities. But even security is not quite covering what we're talking about here, which is security, its safety, its hallucination, its bias, its toxicity. There's all these amazing ways in which AI can be problematic and also incredibly powerful. So we start by very deep, comprehensive evaluation, assess the risk. And then once we help the customer understand that risk, we will then help them put in guardrails to make sure that whatever they're doing with AI is staying secure, safe, and most importantly, compliant. Because this really extends beyond just security. It really comes into compliance. Is the agentic workflow you have in place, is that staying within the guidelines of external regulation? And is it staying within the guidelines of a company's own internal policy that governs how AI can be used, or even how a particular workflow or use case is supposed to work? So red teaming is the term we use for this, but security assessment, followed by guardrails, which is how to mitigate all the risk we're finding, and then continuously monitoring. The third part is monitoring how well these workflows, these conversational AI, how well all of that is working, because everything is moving fast. So we have to monitor, see how well those guardrails are working, and feed that back in so that the protective layer that we bring just gets better and better. So that's what we do. Find the risk, mitigate it, and monitor so it continuously gets better. And all this is in the service of helping our customers go faster with safety. And yes, of course, pharma, life sciences, and frankly, most of our customers don't always move very fast, but they see the potential. And so I joke there's $1 trillion of pressure on the industry to do something with AI. And we're the ones that are helping them get there safely.
That's amazing. I mean, there's so much there for sure. And I know one of the areas that we've started with a few folks that we're talking to, and a couple of our clients even, is around just the policy of your AI usage, which is very, very early stage. Just literally, what do we want people to do or not do with AI? And I think bringing that policy to life in a way that's really tied to the goals of the company, as well as the concerns that your compliance, legal, regulatory teams have, is such a cool way to think about it. So, I mean, obviously, I just came up with one, but how do you see these capabilities that Enkrypt AI brings to the table, enhancing what Improzo can do for our clients?
Yeah, so just building upon what Nathan called out, amongst all those capabilities, the way I would like to sort of blend those capabilities into is how do you look at it both as a vertical and as a horizontal. And when I say horizontal, I'm talking about more of those foundational capabilities that when, let's say, within a pharma ecosystem, somebody's trying to make a call to the LLM, or they're trying to use any of the AI models, how do you take care and prevent the chances of injection attacks? How do you ensure that privacy flags like copyright is taken care of? How do you also ensure that the policies that you have defined, whether it's for AI usage or data guidelines or ethical use, or even going further as we start thinking about these AI-based guidelines, how do you ensure that none of those policies are violated? So those are all things that I mean when I talk about the horizontal or the foundational capabilities. And then there's also a vertical component to that how do you apply it to the functional use cases? And that is where we come in, right? So of course we need to take care of the foundational pieces, but also to apply that to these important areas, like let's say brand, or let's say MLR review, or let's say study design. How do you ensure that no bias creeps in? How do you ensure that no toxicity, sort of creeps in? How do you ensure that no sexual content is creeping in? No PII data that has leaked out. All of those are great examples of how we are applying that into these functional use cases. So both vertical and horizontal is how I feel they'll be able to leverage it for our clients.
That's awesome. And I think, that idea of what's unique sort of to a pharmaceutical company versus maybe there are, I'm assuming, a lot of other things that are generically relevant to any company that, for example, I'm thinking of like HR, right? The kinds of data that sit in HR are very sensitive, but they're not unique to pharma versus if you're talking about PHI and kind of HIPAA compliance, GDPR, CCPA, all these different privacy acts that kind of keep us really on our toes. Those are also components that may be more unique, if you will, to what pharmaceutical companies are doing with their data. So, maybe if either one of you want to give some sort of an example specifically where you think, we can have some benefit from security that would be more tangible for folks, like what's maybe something more real life, if you will, that could help.
Maybe I'll share. I want to double click on policy, and then I'll share a conversation I had recently, actually, with a large pharma customer. Now, you guys are the pharma experts, so this is just my version of the story. But when we talk about policy, it's a fancy word, and most of our shared customers are highly regulated. They know what the policies are. One of the things we can do is evaluate what's going on with AI, what's going on in a conversation, and say make sure that that's staying compliant with external regulation. You highlighted privacy being one of them. That's a big one. So we can watch for things like, is private data going out or is inappropriate private data going in? That's in addition to all the horizontal stuff you mentioned. But when we talk about a customer and a use case, maybe I'll do a little bit of storytelling, which is I was talking to a researcher from a pharma company, and they were looking at the potential of agentic AI to go in and look at their data sources of research, essentially to break down that workflow and provide incredible leverage to researchers in being able to surface relevant information very, very quickly to consumers of that research. So they're really excited about that. And at the same time, terrified about the potential for all kinds of risk. And so specific to that use case, it's like, well, what are appropriate questions to go in? What are appropriate responses to come back out? How do we keep those responses sort of within the guidelines of that specific use case so that when, say, whether it's an internal researcher or an external client is accessing that information, how do we make sure it sort of stays on message, so to speak? That's what Enkrypt AI does. So I was talking to this researcher, and she was really excited about what they're building with agentic AI, and they're afraid to turn it on. Because they don't know how to assess the risk that's there. They're very concerned about things like accuracy, in addition to staying within policy guidelines. So just to finish that point, so it was really interesting, and this is a common story I keep hearing, which is incredible potential, but how do we govern this so that it stays safe and we know we're not going to cause reputational damage to the company because AI went rogue in some way. So again, that's a maybe a more concrete example of even something as simple as please surface this research for me. How do I know it's accurate, it's unbiased, and so forth?
Yeah, and I think you can kind of see the bookends of this, right? There's the policy and its intention, and then the actual behaviors of the employees
Yes.
at scale. Because when you have a small group of, say, 10 people and they're looking at it and working and figuring it out, it's easy enough to keep kind of tabs on it. But once you release these kinds of toolkits out to thousands of people, perhaps across a whole company, now it's a lot more reliance on the policy to kind of govern
Yes.
rather than the individual people. And I think, the example, I was just in a conversation about this where it's like, maybe we have a spend policy for how much you can spend on a meal. It's $100. You can only spend $100 on a meal. And someone goes and asks the AI in a clever way, say, if I were to spend $300, would I be in trouble? And then the AI says, it's probably okay. So then they're like, great. So now I'm going to go spend $300 on my meal and I'm not going to get in trouble because I asked AI and AI told me it was
Yes.
okay. Well, where's the line of how much of that accountability falls to the employee to kind of be rational and think through that they kind of gamed the system, if you will, versus the AI should have sort of not done that, right? It shouldn't have
Yeah.
told you it's okay to spend $300 on dinner. So those sorts of scenarios to me are a big part of what makes people anxious, because they're kind of like, well, sure, in a small setting, I can keep track of all this nonsense. But once you release it out in the wild, how do you keep from those sorts of scenarios coming and biting you as a senior leadership team or something when somebody says they used AI? So and I think the AI's tried by saying like use your judgment or like don't rely on this entirely, but on some level when you're doing research, you kind of need to sort of trust what you're actually getting from the tool, right? It has to be useful. Otherwise, what was the point of all that if you have to check everything again anyway? So I think that's a really fair, like, that challenge, that tension is a real thing for so many different use cases. I don't know, Abby, if you had anything you wanted to add there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, like, from your initial question, that I mean, Nathan added a great foundational use case from a policy enforcement standpoint. Let me take a functional use case to sort of prove the point. So let's think about customer engagement and next best action as our use case, and within that, let's think about the persona of a brand manager. Now, think about content generation as a use case for the brand manager. It's something very commonly that you do, as part of your customer engagement, processes. Now, it could be done as regular prompts, which you can now throw into any of these, large language models, or perhaps you even have agentic AI based on certain rules. It's creating those content, because you can then feed in, your brand guidelines. You can then feed in, for a specific brand and this campaign if you want to generate some content and so on. So imagine that is the use case. Now think about the challenge that if when you're talking to the LLM, the things that you're very worried about is, am I going to leak any of the brand related information? Hopefully no molecule data, but any brand related information that I don't want to share. How do I trap that? Or worse, how do you ensure that no PII data gets leaked out? Or think about when the data that comes back from them as we're engaging with the data, how do we ensure that the tonality of the brand has been accounted for? How do you even take care of areas in terms of that no bias has sort of crept in? How do you take care of tonality? All those are areas where we can use a tool like Enkrypt.ai, of course, with Improzo's domain intelligence, to make sure that happens in a consistent, ethical, and enforced way. So that's a great example I can think of that which is live, real. In fact, this is one of the use cases we are working with one of the pharma companies, that how we can leverage this capability to make sure that the brand's usage of LLM and Gen AI continues to increase, and yet they remain both compliant and enforced from a policy standpoint.
That's
Those
awesome.
are
And I do think
those
you're
are
monitoring more. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I love both of your examples because I think one is very pharma specific and one is a little bit more general. And so I want to touch on yours first, Jane, because it makes me smile, because oftentimes policy consists of, especially with a small team, hey, everyone, read this document and do the right thing. And that's great. And that's how policy happens.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the safest approach, but it's common, is, relying on the trust of your employees, right? That doesn't scale very well, though, especially when you get, like you said, to thousands of employees. And so one of the things we do is we operationalize the policy that governs that use case. So you were, giving an example of sort of expense reporting, and you might have a policy that says, don't game the system or something. But what we'll actually do is we operationalize that. So if there is an interaction that's like, okay, the expense limit is 100, please tell me strategies to avoid this. We won't just, we will, of course, block that, or at least give a much more rational response back to the person using that AI and say, hey, you tried to do this, and oh, by the way, this actually violates company policy right here. So we can help to educate, prevent a problem, but also do the monitoring to show that you've put in the proper controls, and see where policy may or may not be getting violated. And then in the case that you gave, Abhi, around a more functional use case around next best action for a company, it's super important, not just from an external regulation perspective, but brand reputation. So back to, this isn't a matter of external regulation. It's an internal policy that says for that use case, it needs to stay within a certain tone. It has to have certain brand guidelines. There are sort of topics we can go to here and topics we can't. So that's precisely what we do at Enkrypt AI. We will monitor that conversation, whether it's an interaction with an agent or conversational AI, and we will flag or even prevent cases where it's like, this is straying outside, the tone of this response is not where it needs to be, or even identify something as sort of dramatic and silly as like, what if the next best action suggests is you should move to a competitor? You'd want to kind of catch that behavior. And given the probabilistic nature of generative AI, you kind of have to always monitor for these things because these models are incredibly powerful, but they're also unpredictable. And so you need that governing layer there to make sure that when it makes a prediction, it's making the right prediction about a response.
Yeah. And I love that you're thinking about that kind of heterogeneity of response that can come from the power and challenge of this new technology. Because you're right. I mean, any sort of logical next step could come out of this tool, and therefore you have to be kind of ready to head it off and to think of those scenarios. I know in my past life, when I was still in a pharma company, we talked about launching an AI tool enterprise wide, and one of the questions that came up was, what if I ask something really sensitive and like, for example, what's my peer's salary? Does my peer make more money than me? Like that's be a really nice question to know, but you probably don't want the AI to tell you, actually, yeah, you're underpaid for your job and you should ask for a rate. Like that would not, that would be an awkward
It's
conversation for
amazing.
HR. So, but
It's
it
amazing.
could. I mean, that's the challenge of what we have to be able to kind of mitigate against. So I think that's super exciting to think through. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are going to be really excited to hear that there is something for that problem, as opposed to kind of just hoping, which is not a strategy, that it'll
Yes.
be something you can mitigate or manage. And I think especially for compliance reasons, being able to monitor and have reporting on when people are even attempting to kind of thwart the
Right.
system could be really exciting for a compliance team to feel like this is actually better than our current strategy of writing a policy and making everybody read it and attest that they read it and just kind of follow it, right? So that's actually much weaker than the potential interface of an AI conversation to reinforce policy. So that's
Yeah,
super
that
exciting.
the
And
salary one is a classic one.
yeah,
And it's amazing to me in 2025 that that still is a thing and still continues to happen. And we just every week there's another article that comes out about this, about inadvertent exposure of PII, and that's one of the things we monitor for, whether it's on input or on output. We're looking for that kind of sensitive data so that it's not leaking or not being revealed. I think one other thing I wanted to comment on there is it's not just text, it's images, it's audio. And so even in the use case you highlighted, Abhishek, it might not always be that you're in next best action generating a response. It might be an image, it might be a recording, it might be a video. And one of the things that I think is good about our partnership is we're really deep on monitoring those threats. It's kind of entertaining and fun to be in our world right now, and terrifying, just given that every week there's a new thing that happens. So, for example, if you combine an innocuous text prompt, something that it seems totally fine, and you combine it with a seemingly innocuous image, and now you're getting responses back that are totally unsafe, may not be on brand. And that's just text and image. There's also audio. There's lots of ways that these threats are emerging. And so, that's where a lot of companies that we see, large enterprises, they don't know what they don't know.
right.
And so we bring in that understanding of where the risks are and how to manage them. And I think you guys really bring in the aspect of how to think through the potential of the technology and where you need to manage the risk.
That's
Yeah, one
so
interesting
reassuring.
thing, what's also adding, Jane, to that is, I'm just building again on what
Yeah.
Nathan said, is this interesting idea of orchestration as well. So if you think about it, these are not isolated use cases. Oftentimes we talk about use cases are usually in isolation, but particularly in this world of agentic AI, if you start bringing in this orchestration where you're dealing with multiple endpoints, multiple LLMs, multiple agents, but taking care of multiple actions and talking to
Yes.
each other, that is where capability like this is extremely powerful. So whether you're using Harvey for one or OpenAI for other or Mistral for the third one, you'll be able to orchestrate all of that together and still make sure all of that is compliant.
Yeah, that's a great point, Abby, because I think where we see the future is that it's really going towards multi-agentic systems that are working together as a team. Now, it's early days, I would say, especially for pharma, but this is where it's going, which is multi-agentic systems, which may be using different models, have different missions, so to speak, right? And they have to work together collaboratively. And what you need to trust all of that is a governance layer that's not only governing sort of prompts, but also the actions that those agents are taking. So lately, I've been using the term sort of action governance to think about how do you govern not only the interactions between agents, is there prompt injection and things going on in those interactions between them, but how are you governing the actions that they're taking as well? And that's a big part of what we do is, again, understand that risk and put in that governance so that you have the confidence that, sure, you could use a workflow to go do some research and produce an answer for you. But what if you actually wanted to write something, to start actually making changes to something? And right now, everyone is pretty worried about that. They see the potential, but without this protection layer that we bring that covers these heterogeneous use cases, different models, different agents, but you need a single trust layer that gives you visibility and also the ability to govern all of that. Again, so you can go fast and get the value. So yeah, that's another great example about sort of where things are going in terms of multi-agent systems.
It brings a different kind of perspective on this notion, which is of course very buzzy in pharma, of human in the loop, right? We're
Yes,
never going to completely leave the everything to the AI, but at the same time, we're going to have to let a lot more things happen within the AI realm. And so, if the human in the loop could be more of a monitoring step
that's right.
than a proofreading step, or like a constantly checking every single answer kind of step, then you really get the full firepower of the efficiency that AI can bring versus kind of like marginal increase. Because I think that's most of the use cases today are they're improving speed, but marginally because you still want to check every single answer that comes out of the LLM that you're using. So that's a really good kind of like instead of thinking of human in the loop as a human checking, it's a human kind of monitoring, which is a different layer of I think hopefully value proposition for pharma.
I think
So
that's
kind of
right.
thinking about this like bigger picture of this whole idea, how do you get to that greater trust? Because that's I think a big hurdle. It's kind of there's sort of a chicken and egg problem right now. People want to do this, but they don't know where to get started. And like the examples you've given, a lot of it comes down to how do I trust that this is going to be okay? So maybe you can expound on what you've seen, not just in pharma, but across multiple industries, Nathan. Like what's the trend for people to take that leap into this space and start to trust the AI tools they're using?
A great question. What I would like to say about that, well, first, I want to comment on your human in the loop, which is you're absolutely right. It's monitoring. And so the way we think of it is, our agents, governing your agents, but then humans governing all of that. And so it really is more about monitoring where, let's say we operationalize a policy around a use case, and we put in the guardrails to make sure it stays safe. But there needs to be a human that's there to see, well, when are those compliance violations happening? When is this thing straying off of the rails? And potentially feeding that into some kind of alerting system, whatever it is. But ultimately making sure that the humans are there to take a look when it's relevant to do so. And that's really what we do. Zooming out to the bigger picture, the way I would think of this is we're seeing a lot of our customers experiment with generative AI, try different things. The bigger picture, I think, is all about trust and safety. Responsible AI is what's ultimately going to scale adoption. There have been studies and some doom and gloom articles coming out right now about AI, which is saying, it's overhyped and all of that. But I think what's really happening is there's concern over trust. Can we trust these systems? Can we trust these answers? So when I think of some of our specific customers across different verticals, it really comes down to those three aspects. Can I assess the risk? Can I then mitigate it so that I feel confident in adopting these technologies? And it's maybe what you're building, it may be also what you're consuming. You might be consuming a third-party tool that you're using for content generation. You highlighted that earlier, Abhi. You need to make sure that you can trust that tool. And of course, the vendor is going to tell you, oh, it's good. And the state of sort of assessment right now is filling out a questionnaire. Is your tool safe?
Right.
That's kind of the not so safe or trustworthy state of affairs right now. Is trust me, it's all cool. We actually go in and say, well, sure, but let's find out. Let's red team this. Let's assess this for risk. And then let's put the appropriate guardrails around that. Let's operationalize your policy. So bigger picture, what we're seeing is customers, once they see that they can put controls around the risk, then they feel confident in moving faster. And I think it's the companies that figure this out that are going to move faster and out innovate their competitors and ultimately succeed in the market.
Makes sense. And Abhi, what do you think about this from a pharma lens, coming at it that way?
Yeah, from a pharma lens, it's sort of a interesting situation that while most are talking about very fancy AI use cases, genuine ones as well, but very few are actually talking about how do you maintain compliance and privacy at the foundation level as a core. Now, oftentimes people are trying to do a little bit of a one-off that, oh, for this agent, let's ensure that the data is already compliant, nothing happens. So in a way, you're trying to babysit the model, if I can use the term, instead of, let it go wild, but have guardrails. And that is where I feel that this combination, this partnership of Improzo and Enkrypt AI is fruitful. I mean, it's something which is bringing best of both worlds because it's bringing in the domain and the AI-led solutions from Improzo through our ISO platform, but also powered by this industry-leading AI security. So it's a little bit like a happy marriage to then allowing our clients to focus on what they do best, which is to run their business. Don't worry about how you're taking care of these foundational security related to AI, because we have the best of the best, as I already called out, and this came up early during the discussion with Sahil, who's the CEO of Enkrypt.ai as well, that they're already using it by some of the largest, open Gen AI systems as well, the LLMs as well. So that's what caught our eye. And the idea was how do we bring the same capability to pharma? And that's where there's, from a big picture standpoint, taking care of these foundational use cases, but also applying them to the functional one. So pharma can then focus on running the business.
You make a great point, Abhi, which is, I think where a lot of companies is they're exploring a specific use case, a specific area, and maybe feel they've got a handle around how to provide trust and safety around that use case. But as I said earlier, I think the bigger picture is ultimately we have to figure out how to scale trust to the entire organization. And so right now, if you sort of go use case by use case, point by point, and try to figure out how to operationalize or scale trust, it just isn't going to scale very quickly. And so you need that foundational layer that is going to allow you to then embrace new use cases, new technologies very, very quickly for advantage. And so I think in the future, a big picture, every company is going to need an AI governance layer, a security layer that Enkrypt AI brings, because that is how they will be able to drive faster adoption and get all the benefits. So that's how we'll sort of deal with the doomsayers.
Yeah, one other thing I would add, Nathan, to that is this whole idea of observability, right? So how do you bring in this idea of data and AI observability into the mix so that there's a engine which is constantly monitoring, right? Constantly observing. And then whenever it observes something has gone wrong, it immediately creates an alert. I mean, good analog to that would be how we treat, cybersecurity and antivirus software. That's a great example, right? There's a brain sitting out there which is continuously monitoring and saying that, yeah, I do see something going wrong. Let me flag it out. And that is how, in our use cases as well, we're thinking of the brand example that I gave earlier, and there are many, many more, of course, where the idea is to allow them to focus on their business, but when something goes wrong, immediately flag that out. So there's an engine which is observing, and that's how we can look at this whole idea of data and AI observability together.
Yeah, I think that's a really good metaphor. And in fact, we are increasingly partnering with those cybersecurity vendors who are focused a bit on the more on traditional cybersecurity, but it's all about continuously monitoring and looking for threats. So we're now bringing that continuous monitoring and threat detection to the world of AI, which is security, but also safety and compliance. So it's really interesting how the notion of security and safety is shifting, especially when you start to look at industries like pharma.
Yeah, well, it's like the CISOs all have to up their game in a whole different domain from where they have been operating around, hackers and different kinds of attacks from outside. Now you have to monitor internal activity within your own people too. So
Right.
it's a really important part of the puzzle. And so do you think this actually, or to what I assume yes, but to what extent do you think this is going to accelerate, or this having these protections in place accelerate adoption or accelerate kind of use cases? Do you think, there's some things that are going to be specifically helpful in moving things forward?
I personally feel that it's going to be a mix of both. Jane, I would love to hear what Nate thinks, but a mix of both, which is will definitely help improve adoption and will also absolutely help with new use cases. So let me see if I can think of some examples. So from new use cases standpoint, and there is something as you very well know, Jane, that from a ISO platform standpoint, we're constantly looking for these new use cases, particularly in our discussions with our clients. So as you think about use cases where from an AI governance standpoint, AI security standpoint, AI trust standpoint, there are many of those use cases emerging every other day. So whether you're trying to do a new study design or you're trying to create a new patient cohort where you're worried about, let's say, bias not creeping in, or if you are, let's say, thinking about the use case of a digital auditor, where you're worried about compliance, including PII, PHI, the HIPAA, the GDPR, CCPAs, all of the world. Or let's say if you're thinking about patient engagement, right, or patient adherence, where you're trying to interact with them, or perhaps even in the patient support services, where again you have to interact directly with the patients. You have to worry about PII data. You have to worry about what tone is being used, what content is being used, even in case of D2C branding. So I can just go on and on. All those AI, agentic, and GenAI use cases where, like, we can bring in the capability of ISO and Enkrypt AI together. And in terms of the acceleration, that's another interesting part that it absolutely helps to improve trust. Right? I mean, think about if something that reduces the chances of PI leakage, of course, you're going to trust it more. If to your earlier comment about the human in the loop, if there's a system which is actually helping the human and flagging it is saying that something has gone wrong with the model, please go and take that action. Of course, that option is going to increase versus it being treated as a black box, which unfortunately is the case today.
Yeah, I think there's two ways I think about accelerating adoption. I think the first one, we're kind of touching on how do you uh, show trust? How do you evaluate for that? How do you assess risk? And I think fundamentally, our hypothesis as a company is that when our customers can get their arms around the risk and have the tooling to manage that risk, that's fundamentally going to allow them to move faster. But if we zoom out even further to sort of what's going on in the AI market right now, there are a number of voices now that are essentially saying, well, maybe AI is not that good. And that's a limiting factor to adoption. What I actually think is happening is the concern over trust means that people are dumbing down the use cases. We're afraid this could do something crazy, so we're going to just dial it back and dial it back to the point where it's like, well, this isn't all that good. It's not all that compelling. Maybe AI really doesn't have the potential. But I think what we're really seeing is they're sort of reducing the potential of a use case out of fear of it doing something wrong, rather than really leaning into what's possible, but having the right governance there. So I think this has been sort of my interpretation, like literally in the last month. Is I think MIT put out a study about, state of adoption's not there. I think it's actually that out of concern about risk, people are limiting the potential. And if they can get their arms around the risk, then the potential is really high.
That makes so much sense. And I actually think it's this lack of trust means that people are unwilling to share more details with the AI that would
Right.
allow the AI to do a better job. Like I think we were talking about that a little bit in a conversation I had this week with a client where, they're saying that the use they'd had or their try of AI, of course, they were not using it for work. It was just kind of like outside of work asking things, and they weren't super impressed with what it did. And so when we started talking through what a really solid prompt looks like, right? That you're really setting it up with a role and you're giving it some activity and context and you're kind of, it could be a paragraph, right? A prompt, a really solid prompt could be quite long as opposed to just like, where should I go for dinner?
Mhm.
You may not get the most exciting prompt, but if you're like, I am a vegetarian who, only likes to eat at restaurants that are below $30 per dish and da, 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 like, you put all those details in, you might actually get a better answer too. But that concept is new, right? That's a new way of using this interface. So I think helping people understand that the more detail they are willing to share, the better the answer and the output's going to be for their query. That, of course, requires you to trust it enough to tell it all that sort of, which is potentially sensitive information. Obviously, these examples are not, but I think that's part of the journey that a lot of people are, there's a user component to this that is, I think you're spot on. Like people are kind of ratcheting back what they're willing to share, and therefore the results they get are not
Which
that impressive. And then it kind of unwinds to the point where you're like, what was the point of this? I can just Google it. I don't need this, like it doesn't help me anymore. So I think that's a really, really good point. So I want to,
it
this
goes
has
in
been,
it
we
goes in
could,
both ways. Briefly,
yeah,
I just want to say, so you said you talked about the input. Can I trust this
yes.
this AI to provide all these details and feel it's going to handle it safely? I think the flip side is also true.
Yeah.
The agent, the conversational AI might produce a really good, sophisticated response. The problem is 10% of the time it produces nonsense, right?
Yeah.
And so like in the reverse is really true, which is like I can't trust something if 10% of the time it's producing nonsense
Yeah. How
or
do you
it's
get that
producing a
lower?
biased response. So that's what I meant by like these use cases will get a lot better when we can actually allow the model, for example, to do what it does best, but put the governance there to make sure that for the small percentage of time that it goes off, that you block that
Right. Right. Or you route, I think one of the things
or
that we
you
talked about,
reroute it. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
route it to the right sort of tool, or make sure that your the learning kind of fund of knowledge that it has is appropriate so that it's starting from a more sophisticated place than just everything that's ever been written on the internet, which obviously has some inherent flaw to it. So
There's
I
some
think
risky stuff in there.
there's some things that don't quite make sense. And I think that's where some of the early misfires came from, right? Is if you rely too heavily on everything that's ever been written on the internet, you run the risk that things will not be accurate and they will be just total falsehoods being used as fact. And that's kind of how things have gotten to a skepticism, right? I think people who've
Yes.
experienced that firsthand then tend to be like, nope, this whole thing is garbage. I'm not using it. So it's unfortunate because I think some of that bad news got way all around the world before the good news was even out the door. So I
Well,
think that's part of the
bad news
challenge.
travels fast.
It
I think
does. It does.
those who can really prove the trustworthiness are the ones who are going to win.
Yep, yep, and I think that's the other thing that's interesting, and you were talking about this $1 trillion worth of pressure to do something. I think the other pattern, um, that seems to be part of this is also the the CEO who says, "What are we doing with AI? What's our AI thing?"
Yes.
And then everyone has to kind of figure out what that looks like, and so that is actually another way that I find, clients are coming to us, and I
We're,
actually
we're,
experienced that to a certain extent firsthand, even in pharma companies myself, where it's kind of like the CEO is using ChatGPT and thinks it's cool and wants to use it for work, and so basically just says, "How do we make that happen?" And so that's the other kind of end of the spectrum where it's a little bit naive, but
well, that
coming from a
is
place of interest too. So you have to kind of navigate those two, kind of places where people are coming at this toolkit. And the skepticism is unfortunately confirmed in some cases, and then people do kind of say, I'm never touching that again. So you have the skeptics
that
out
is
there.
that $1 trillion of pressure, Jane, which is, that CEO is under pressure from the board, who's under pressure from the market, who like, what are you doing with AI? And
Yeah,
so that's where all that pressure is coming from. But this can lead to some misfires when people roll things out too quickly or they don't understand what the risks are and how to manage them when they roll them out. But yeah,
totally.
that's, when I joke about $1 trillion of pressure, I'm literally thinking of that CEO who may or may not be naive, but is certainly under a ton of pressure. And that pressure to move quickly can lead to some uninformed behavior. We'll put it that
Yeah.
way.
And there's a number of examples of early adopters having to kind of roll back and
Yes.
rethink, and maybe they overstepped a little bit in terms of the potential they saw.
And those are some of
And
our customers today.
yeah,
The
right.
early
Because they
adopters who knew they needed something better and then put us in place so
yeah.
they could put things back out into the market with safety. Yeah.
Totally. I think that's a big part of it too, is it's not a one way thing. You could be doing okay and then you could need help. You could be getting the help and then doing a lot better, but still ultimately need another layer of protection or new ways to kind of modulate your content. So it keeps going. I'm going to say we could talk about this, it sounds like, for a lot longer. This has been wonderful. And I have a feeling Nathan may be back to talk about even more details, because I'm sure this is going to be an ongoing topic. It's not going away. So I guess to kind of get us to some form of end of this particular conversation, I'd love to get a couple things. First, just thinking about this partnership that we forged. What's next? What are we going to do next between Enkrypt.ai and Improzo? Maybe Nathan, you can start us off.
Sure. I mean, I think what's next, honestly, is making our shared pharma customers successful and showing them that they can move faster with the trust, safety, and the controls that they need. So to me, honestly, for my entire career, I get excited when I see customers getting advantage from technology. And so that's what's next, is showing our customers and showing the market that you can, in fact, move fast with AI without having to sacrifice risk. If you wear the right equipment, if you wear a helmet, you can go pretty fast, but I would be worried about those who don't bring the right safety equipment. So that's what's next, making our customers successful.
Abhi?
Yeah, I would call it onward and upwards. So how do we continue to collaborate and take the best to our pharma customers, which also means coming up with more use cases across our AI agents and within the ISO platform, across our AI apps in the ISO platform, and also as Enkrypt.ai comes up with new features, features like relevancy or reducing hallucination, improved temperature control, and some of those factors will be able to leverage them and again create this domain layer on top of it to take the best to our pharma customers.
That is so exciting. So I guess in terms of just closing thoughts here, what is the advice you guys have for pharma leaders who are trying to navigate AI responsibly? Maybe Abby, you can start on this one.
Sure thing. So three things perhaps I can call out. The first is keeping a patient-centric mind, whether it's for AI governance, AI usage, of course, AI security, because we owe it to them. So keeping the patient-centric mindset and keeping them at the heart of every decision, including when thinking about usage of AI and security. The second is we talked about the human in the loop. So AI still needs human oversight. We all agree, especially in this hyper compliant regulatory world like pharma. So their one suggestion is that create a culture of ethics and responsibility. So oftentimes we try to create these guardrails, we create these rules, but then unfortunately we don't create a culture of adopting all of that. So that would be my second thought. And lastly, I would love to, pass on this message that leverage experts. There are people like Improzo, like Enkrypt.ai, like our ISO platform. We are bringing these two capabilities together. Please reach out. Please leverage us and other experts to make sure that the journey remains brighter for you, but also for our end customers and end users, which are the patients.
So helpful. Nathan, you get last word here on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just want to build on what Abby shared, which is, as a product person, think what should pharma executives think about? Yes, 1000% focusing on the customer, helping them to understand how you're thinking about AI trust and safety. That is how you will scale trust with your customers, with your partners, and with the market. I think that's essential, is thinking about your customer first, and then what is going to be appropriate adoption, what are the policies, how do you want to govern that, and then thirdly, you said it well, you want to pick an expert, especially in the world of AI right now. It is moving really fast. You need to pick someone who is deep into that area, that is staying ahead of what's emerging and what's happening, so that you have the confidence to focus on your business, and you can find a partner who can help you unlock the new use cases. That's Improzo, and make sure you can move fast and safe. That's with Enkrypt. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks to both of you so much, Abhishek and Nathan. It's been wonderful to have this conversation. I am genuinely excited to see how this can come together to what already has and will continue to come together to be of value for customers and for patients, really, at the end of the day. And it's a really nice partnership to strengthen both the innovation that we're trying to achieve, as well as the integrity and trust within it in the field. So that to me is the other really lovely partnership and combination. So for those of you who's listening, there's going to be a lot more detail about Enkrypt AI listed here, and some other links to things so you can see more about both the capabilities and company. And I'm so excited to be able to have this partnership continue to be highlighted here in the Improzone. So until we talk again, stay curious, stay responsible and ethical, and stay with us in the Improzone. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Thanks, Nathan. Thanks, Jane.
This has been the Improzone, improving life, empowering customers. Follow us and stay tuned for what's next.